the Chinese Russians are genuinely independent powers with an independent foreign policy, independent defense policy, and independent, I would say they are independent civilizations. So for many of these, there's internal dynamics between the two sides that they treated each other as partners, not allies, by the way, because allies requires the minimum thing, that is, you're committed to each other regardless of what happened. So China does not commit itself to any Russians fighting, and vice versa, right? If Taiwan happened, Russia is not automatically committed. So that's the West does not understand that. I've been talking to many of them that they are not allies. They are friends. So China's neutrality is genuine. It's not like optimistic.
Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking again to Dr. Yu Bin, a great expert on Russia and China. Dr. Yu Bin earned his PhD from Stanford University, and he's a senior fellow at the Russian Studies Center of the East China Normal University in Shanghai, and the author of 6 books and more than 150 chapters. Most impressively, Dr. Yu Bin has been writing in-depth quarterly updates on Chinese-Russian relations for the past 25 years. They're all available for free online on Comparative Connections. The link will be below in the description. Yu Bin, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Well, I'm glad to have you back because I want to ask you a couple of questions later on about Russia and China, but I would like to start with an article that you wrote recently in which you focus really on the role of Munich, actually. I think it's not the main argument of the article, but you explain on several points how the Munich Security Conference was important to what's currently going on in Europe, and Munich 1938, the argument. Can you maybe expand a little bit on how you view the importance of Munich in many different ways for the European catastrophe at the moment?
I think this year's Munich Security Conference is anything but dramatic, and I think this was where we start to see the old West, the Europeans and Americans were distancing themselves from each other, and eventually, culminate in the White House very heated debate discussion between President Trump and Ukraine President Zelensky regarding how and what to make out of the peace, how to stop the war. I think the Europeans were caught in between in this Munich 61, and they cried wolf. It's it was a replay of the Munich sellout appeasement. So this is kind of like what I see as a forever Munich. So, ever since 1938, it became such icon in the mindset of the collective West that anything, like negotiation, compromise, or it's a sellout, it's a replay of the 1938. So this is like for the Europeans, U.S. President Donald Trump represents the kind of historical replay of this infamous Munich sellout. But for me, this collective memory of the Europeans seem to be cherry picking or selective in a way that they forget there's a 2007 Munich, where Russian President Putin warned the coming of the NATO eastward expansion, and for the Europeans, they totally rejected. They say this is unwarranted and take it easy and it'll be okay. But Putin really meant it, because the West has been continuously pushing eastward, and after that 2007 Munich speech that Putin gave, the West made 3 or 4 rounds, more rounds of eastward expansion. Eventually, coming to the judgment day, that is the war or the Russia's military operation in Ukraine. So that was all about the selective cherry picking of memory of Munich has its consequences or blowbacks against Europeans themselves. So this is a very sensitive moment. My article really want to point it out that of all the problems or anything that the U.S. President Trump behaved at home and abroad, but he's been very brutally honest about the fallacy of this Munich sellout. It's about war, about the danger of World War III and nuclear war, which will be no winners. I think Trump really nailed it. No matter what he says he does at home abroad, to many, even in China, he's just like a little kid telling that the collective West, the emperor, is naked, and you are playing with the fire. You're fighting a war that would be no winners. It's unwinnable. How could you win a war against one of the largest nuclear arsenals in the world? And even if you want to talk all about this, why not you yourself to go there? Let Ukraine start. This is what really the Trump people think about. The people are dying. People are, these are young men and women, and dying by the tens of thousands, simply because of you want to have Ukraine in the embrace of NATO. So for many in China, no matter how they love and hate, by the way, Trump is a deeply divided figure, not only in America, but also in China. Lots of people, hate him, but lots of people say, well, give him time, give him a chance. It's a piece of a lifetime, perhaps. Maybe another 4 years, the Americans will go back to war. So Trump has, Europeans behave in a way that really kind of, they don't see this any care about human life. But this is really, to many in China, this is the neutrality of China has played and has preached in this very dangerous, I call it the brave and the grave new world of, Trump 2.0, or, the toxic mix of weapons of mass destruction and artificial intelligence. And Europeans need to understand there are limits how far you can stretch this Munich analogy, which is very toxic, by the way.
The unique analogy is super toxic because it's used in order to undermine any form of peace negotiations that would not end in the maximum demands the Europeans have, right? Anything short of everything plus Crimea back to Ukraine is unacceptable and will then be trash talked with the Munich argument. But if you look at this from China, and also if you are in touch with all of your colleagues in Shanghai and in the policy thinking world in China, how is this viewed from China, like of what Europe is doing at the moment? Is there an understanding for where this war mentality is coming from, or is this baffling Chinese analysts?
I think, by the way, there are lots of opinions in China regarding the Ukraine war and the Europeans, for this kind of like a seemingly growing gap between Trump's America and the hard-bleeding liberals in Europe, or the war parties in Europe. Some see this as maybe an opportunity for the Chinese to take some steps to mend relationship with Europe, which has been quite difficult in the past few years. Others would see some limits about this, but whatever the case, the Chinese has been, by and large, want to see and wait and see how much this peace effort initiated by President Donald Trump in America could come out with some specific, steps towards a genuine long-term peace. Many Chinese believe this is a very difficult, if not impossible, to make a durable peace. But it's better than nothing because the alternative is simply too dangerous. It's still very dangerous, by the way, if you see the Europeans now gathering together, having a defense minister or joint chiefs meeting with other Americans now. They are getting more independent, and the French are talking about extending their nuclear deterrence to the east and to other members of European Union. And the kind of 30,000 some peacekeepers in Ukraine, regardless of the Russian thing, they know exactly the Russians disagree with this. If any possibility for peacekeeping in Ukraine, it must be under the UN leadership. And this is another way that China see, well, in the future, if UN indeed is invited, allowed to get into this process, and the Chinese may play certain roles, particularly in peacekeeping, because ever since 1990, when China started to commit itself to UN-led peacekeeping effort, China has committed something like 30,000. This is maybe 20 or 30,000 personnel to peacekeeping operations around the world. And China is the largest contributor in both manpower and money to US UN peacekeeping among the 5 UN Security Council members. So China has been in the business for a very long time, and dozens of people died. I mean, the Chinese peacekeepers died. But the Chinese are talking about that possibility, but even only if UN kicks in. So that's the way the Chinese would like to see, some positive development along this, effort to seek certain peace arrangements or ceasefire. So this is, but it's very difficult because the Chinese understand from their own experience that ceasefire to peace to stability, enduring stability is very, very difficult. We can talk about the Korean issue, by the way. There's lots of things the Chinese experience. And I don't know how much I would talk about it. For example, in July 1953, when the armistice agreement finally signed in Korea, there were only 3 parties. South Korea refused to sign the agreement. South Korea actually tried to undermine the peace process, and by unilaterally taking operations, and also particularly try to mess up the reparation of POWs. So the treaty was signed, not a treaty, a kind of agreement, the armistice agreement, the truce agreement was signed only by 3 parties, Chinese, North Koreans, and Americans. So that was the case till today. And South Korea was not there. And even more, I would say, dramatic and fascinating. The Americans and Chinese actually had a kind of a strategic tacit understanding that the Chinese launched the last operation, the King Song operation, which lasts for 5 days, and directly only target on the South Korean positions. And Americans, by and large, basically watch and their allies be bombarded by the Chinese artilleries, and then they stop, undermining the agreement. So this is a kind of a collaboration between the 2 enemies, and the Korean peace truce agreement was signed because of the strategic collaboration between the 2 enemies. Can you believe it? Trump is not the first one to reach out to the arch enemy of the West, Putin. China and the United States did it. So peacemaking is very difficult and very tricky. And I don't know how this kind of current approach would lead to any specific. So far, it's okay, but with lots of problems, problems like public posturing. You know, the commander in deals, I call the commander in deals of the United States, it's not it's Donald Trump, always goes to the public, you know, and these public posturing is not very conducive to the kind of agreement that or process that all sides now engage in. And basically, if you publicize it too much, and you not only put yourself in a very difficult situation, an unflexible situation, but particularly the other side. For example, the recent talks between U.S. and Ukraine sides in Saudi Arabia, and they publicly announced everything that the 30 days ceasefire, and the ball is on the Russian side. So they didn't even bother to take the agreement to Putin behind the doors, and then they just announced it, leaving very little ground for Putin to navigate. But Putin's response so far has been very, very interesting, by the way, very diplomatic. I think leaving lots of space for the other side while trying to preserve and protecting Russians' interests. So I think there's a kind of a back and forth. I would say it's too much publicity in a way that the current peace process. But whatever the case, the Chinese have been patient, and because this is exactly what the Chinese want, this is exactly what the world wanted, because the alternative is just too dangerous. I mean, the continuation of the war, not just for the two sides, the two young men and women of Russians, Ukraine dying by the thousands, but also, for the world, the escalation and accident happened. So I think this is a good thing for the Chinese, and Chinese have been relatively low profile these days because it's what Chinese have been talking about. Let's talk. So this is what I see. Mm-hmm.
May I ask you, because I mean, what we are currently seeing is a level of diplomatic communication or communication in general across great power frontiers that we haven't seen for 3 years. And I agree with you that on the one hand, publicizing everything is problematic. On the other hand, we also understand now that the Americans decided to communicate with the Russians on several levels. Right? There's the diplomatic level. They actually talk with them. And we don't know if they tell us everything that they say, right? We only know that they publicize much more than we think. Secondly, they communicate on the level of public communication, right, with the actual announcement. And thirdly, they also communicate on the military level, as in the Americans resumed now intelligence sharing, and they are, the Russians at the same time also communicate. We are not going to stop our military intervention unless we solve certain points. So they still have like military communication. It's a horrible way of communication, but it is one. So they're constantly sending signals, right? And I talked to Michael von der Schulenburg, a former UN undersecretary, and he was involved in a lot of negotiations. What he said is that overall the process that we are in is one where you can see how the two sides, as you said before, have strategic common interests, and they're playing back and forth in order to land on a ceasefire at some point.
Yeah.
Do you think the Chinese are also are waiting by the sidelines, or are the Chinese at this point also trying to support this process in one way or another?
I think I agree with you that there's a multiple channels and at the multiple levels that the Russians and Americans are engaging. If we judge from the revelation by the special envoy Witkoff to Moscow, and he basically come back with the message that Putin is serious, unlike what the Europeans crying out, "Oh, Putin is lying. Putin is not sincere." But he basically said Putin is sincere, and genuine and try to constructively reach out and meet the U.S. Side halfway. And so it's not unlike many say, well, this is a playing game thing, that this is Putin by himself and in substance, but we've disagree with that. That Europeans blah blah blah. And he talked about how, I mean, without getting into detail, for example, the Russians, he talked with the Russian side about, Putin, the other issues, for example, like the Black Sea and how the navigation and the ports will be handled with the ceasefire, how, the power plants will be secured. So these are lots of specifics, and these things are already kind of a positively responded by the U.S. side. I just, before our talk, I read the White House, spokesperson, and she said basically, and President Trump and is the two sides very close to something very significant, and they'll talk about a lot of specific issues. So once you get to the specifics, I think this is a good sign. That is, I think the Russian side really try to, meet the White House. Of course, there's still quite a distance between all three sides, by the way. For example, the Russians would still, for example, want kind of like a guarantee this will be in writing. The ceasefire would lead to enduring peace and stability. That's the Russians still insist on that. And the Russians, for example, still want those occupied territory to be themselves. They are unwilling to negotiate that. So this is we have the elections, all kinds of things. So the Russians wanted that, and the Americans really want to freeze at the moment. That is, you keep your land, but maybe the Ukrainians keep their sovereignty. So you will work it out in the future, but let's stop fighting. But the White House realized there is no hope. They publicly talking about it many times. There is no point. It's impossible to go back to either 1991 or 2014, when Crimea was taken. And so, but the White House really want to have a kind of an immediate ceasefire. So this is quite a decent. For the Ukrainians, the Russian side condition is unacceptable. But I think the two sides, I mean, tomorrow, Trump is going to talk with Putin, by the way. This is, they already publicized this. And I think we'll wait and see. And I think, but let me quite to summarize what the Chinese see, the Russian strategy. This is not just my position. I think I've talked to and communicated with quite a few well-known Russologists, the specialists on Russia. And they tend to see the current Russian reach out or position essentially lying on three issue areas. This is like what you just described, the military or top leaders. There are three separate but interrelated issues. First, the Russians want to have what they see as a long-term solution of the war, to stop the war, but on the condition that it will be leading to the genuine and endurable peace. This is number one. Number two, the Russians wanted to use this opportunity to improve relationship with the United States. So the Russian-U.S. relationship need to be restored, improved, taking up this unique opportunities of next 3 or 4 years. By the way, time flies. They won't be next Trump. maybe someone else, but Trump will be gone in 3 or 4 years. So this is a unique opportunity to have a general improvement of relations with Russia, which has already taken place, by the way. Russia already named its ambassador to Washington already. So this is the second area the Russians are working on. The third is to alleviate those sanctions from the United States, particularly from the United States at this point. Maybe it takes time from the Europeans, but there's more than 20,000 pieces of sanctions. I think the American side would be confused about so many sanctions against the Russians. So the Russians would also like to see this as a broad thawing of relations, the freeze between the two sides. So this is very, very important. And Putin just a few hours ago just signed agreement, to a presidential decree to allow several major hedge funds in the United States to, reconnect with their assets or, purchase those shares of Russian energy or gas companies. So essentially, unfreeze those from the Russian side. I think Putin is taking the first step. So I think this is very important. It's a signal to the U.S. side that the Russians are already taking. So these are related, but not necessarily. Even without, for example, a ceasefire, the Russians really want to go ahead with a general improvement of relations with Washington first, and with Europe. Perhaps in the near future. So these are what is going on, and the Chinese would like to see that these things will take some progress.
There is talk among a lot of the analysts that, one of the strategies of the Trump administration can, or probably is, betterment of relations with Russia in order to have more time to focus on China and increase the pressure on the Pacific. Because there's people who say that. I mean, there's Defense Secretary Hegseth actually said so. The Europeans should take over responsibility in Ukraine so that you can do a burden sharing, and the United States gets more time to focus on China. Now, do you believe that? And secondly, do you think China actually, in your circles, people actually think that this is a threat, that there might be something building up, and that there might be a wedge, that the US might try to drive a wedge between Russia and China?
This is like a Munich analogy for the old Europe, right? It's forever. It's always there. So in the mindset of many in the West, that anything they try to do with Moscow would serve target on the third party, and this is very interesting and naive, and because they forget, or they don't even bother to understand the broad spectrum of Russian-China relations. That has been a very, very, I would say, it's my longtime view that this is a normal relationship. It's a pragmatic relationship. It's a stable relationship in the midst of, those mega changes around the world. This is something that everybody's talking about, that in America, transatlantic relationship, and everything is in fast speed, but the Russian-China relations have been very stable. Stable not because they love each other, but because they understand each other's basic interests. China and Russia has gone way beyond the love and hate oscillation, like the Cold War, like the honeymoon and divorce. 10 years honeymoon between 1949 to 1959, which was followed by 30 years of divorce. It's 1960 to 1989. And that's very, very, I would say, detrimental for the broad strategic and long-term interests of two sides. And the two sides learn about that. And they invested so much into the stability and the confidence building in their bilateral relationship. One of the key issues, I would say this is an agreement by both sides to maintain stability and the peace of the 4,000 plus kilometers of border is very important because this used to be something that both sides committed so much of their national wealth and power and hurt both sides. So this is something that it's very different from the past. So for many of these, there's internal dynamics between the two sides that they treated each other as partners, not allies, by the way, because allies requires the minimum thing, that is, you're committed to each other regardless of what happened. That's the alliance all about. But the Chinese and Russians are genuinely independent powers with an independent foreign policy, independent defense policy, and independent, I would say they are independent civilizations. By the way, there are very few countries in the world that really have genuine independence. By genuine, I mean they have not only the ability, but not only the willingness, but the ability to do so. I would say the United States is one. I would say China and Russia, they're all genuinely independent powers. They are partners, but not allies. They are unlike in 1914, when the allies and two sides were warring parties commit to each other. One side, one country is attacked, and everybody else. China and Russia do not have the automatic, interlocking mechanism. So China does not commit itself to any war Russians fighting, and vice versa, right? If Taiwan happened, Russia is not automatically committed. So that's the West does not understand that. I've been talking to many of them that they are not allies. They are friends. So China's neutrality is genuine. It's not like optimistic. China does not want to see war in general, by the way. Look at what China has done in the past 40-some years, building bridges, highways, and across the Eurasian land. This is a totally different path of the other way, which is the bombing your way. You see the force of destruction, the wars or forever wars the West has fought.
This is,
right?
this is so interesting and fascinating to me because I think you're absolutely right. The problem is that the West, and especially Europe, the United States also, but to a lesser degree, but especially Europe, they are not capable of thinking in frameworks outside of what they're used to. So when they see Russia and China cooperating, they immediately perceive that as an alliance, and they immediately then put everything into those terms. And to them, the Russians, they try to portray the Russians as like weak, therefore they portray them as the junior partner. And they perceive everything in this weird sense of who dominates who, because that's what they do. That's how they act with others. But this is a genuine misunderstanding of how Russia and China cooperate with each other, isn't it?
This type of misunderstanding occurred at the multiple levels, and we're talking about at the policy level. Everything between China and Russia must be a conspiracy against the West or America under Biden or whatever. So this is the way they look at it. They don't have any collective memory or I would say attention span to look at the long-term history. Ironically, the Europeans are supposed to know more about history, by the way. They don't. But if you look at the academia, let me talk a little bit about those theories. In Western study of Russian-China relations, there are basically two major schools of thought. One is what I called the alarmed school. Anything between Russia and China is alarming to the West. It must try to work together. So this is one extreme side of the academia. There's another extreme side that is, okay, it doesn't matter. They are not going to do anything. This is what I see the limitation schools. No matter what happened between Russia, they are fundamentally different. They are different culture, different history, different religion, different political system. Current Russia and China is far apart from the Cold War time. Both are communism now. China is still communist. Russia is back to the West. So anything they do won't allow them to overcome the long-term peace between themselves. This is what I call the limitation schools. What they fail to see, the Russian-China relation is not black and white, but there are lots of gray area. Lots of things between themselves do not fall into these two, yes or no schools or alarmist versus limited school. But this is the West is all about. They tend to see the world in black and white, good or evil, and anything different from the West, it must be threatening. So they refuse to see the world is diverse, is dynamic. Look at the 46th Munich Security Conference, document publication is multi-polarization. But this is one, by the way, this Munich, the theme of Munich conference is very interesting. For the first time, they try to assert themselves away from Washington, by the way. They anticipate a difference with Washington. So they start talking about, multipolarities. This is the Russians, Chinese been talking about for decades. But their multipolarity is totally different. If you read the document carefully, they see, they really kind of like very uneasy about the way the world is going. They still use the word, the democratic powers and autocracies. Anything non-West is threatening. So multipolarity or multipolarization is threatening to the West fundamental interests. So this is what Munich is all about. Even if they seem to be progressive from the unipolarity, but they still deeply distrust the global South. So when Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi delivered his speech in Munich this time, he talked about China as a stability, a force of stability and development. No matter what changes in the world, China would stay with the set course, that is, dedicate itself to stability, to development, to peace, to civilization coexistence, which including the West. By the way, when the West arose in the past 500 years, that rise of the West was at the expense of the non-West. Because if you just look at the colonization, imperialism, slave trade, opium wars, give me a break. That's the rise of the West at the expense of the rest. But the rise of these rest does not necessarily go the same way. The West always has its own place. The only change in the future, multipolar world in which China, maybe Russia would prefer to see is countries, big, small, have equal power, or equal standing, equal rights. And the West too has its own place. It does not mean the end of the West. It only means the end of Western manipulation and wars against the non-West. Anything other than that, West is part of the global as equal partners. So that's something the West is afraid of. They're no longer West-centered. So yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I need to ask you because I think I perceive China as extremely patient with the West and especially with the Europeans, because every single time Europeans go to China, they tend to lecture China on all sorts of things like free trade and human rights and Uyghurs and so on and so forth. And the Chinese keep just repeating, no, look, these are internal matters, and we would like to contribute to peace and stability in the way that China can or would like to, and the Europeans keep ignoring it, and not only ignoring, they keep not hearing it. I think they are genuinely incapable of of making sense of the arguments coming from Beijing. Now, at the same time, Beijing is extremely patient. Is this patience something that is part and parcel of the way China approaches world affairs, or is this something strategic that at some point might run out, and China might change its approach?
It's a good question. Where your question seems to suggest that this may be temporary. The Chinese, once maybe more powerful, would be more impatient with the West. I would say not necessarily. I think the Chinese believe we are different. That's no question. But being different does not mean we cannot or should not communicate, and we cannot respect each other's mutual interests. So this is, I think, the rise of China actually has been a process of Chinese going back to the past of its old traditional civilizational wisdoms, like Confucius' notion, unity of the differences. By the way, this is the issue I talk about briefly in Kyoto University, University. But so we're different. It's okay, we're different. We're not angry with you, even if you know very little about China. But you can look and see yourself. So the notion of unity of difference essentially means we can unite, work together precisely because we are different. And this is totally different from the Western notion. Western notion is the unity of the sameness. Look at NATO, look at the European Union, look at the coalition of democracy Biden, peddled around for 4 years. They're only united countries of their own similar systems or similar civilization, similar religion. This is the identity politics is all about. By the way, racism is identity politics because you're judged not because what you do, but because who you are. So the West judge the non-West, including China, not because what China does, but because you're China. So anything China is the enemy or the threat. In America, this happened last year. A senator, I think his name is Scott from Florida, he declared, tried to pass motions in the Senate, in the House, that even Chinese imported garlic is a threat to America's national security. Anything related to China is a national security threat. I think the Europeans, in many ways, still living in that. They cannot accept something different, something better. If you're better than the West in AI, in semiconductors or artificial, battery electric cars, you must steal things from us. This is the mentality in America, day in and day out. The media bombard the audience. They talk themselves into such a position. China, everything China, but Chinese don't think the way the West. They see we're different, but we can work together. Chinese, by and large, not very ideological, very pragmatic, open mind. And if you're doing something great, we learn from you. And for the West, if you're doing great, you must steal from us. So this is a totally different mentality. So you go to China, you see yourself. Nobody tried to impose you on anything. But the West continue to live in that. By the way, I would say the Chinese do not judge the West in the way Western judge China. The Western democracy is fine, human rights are fine. Keep it to yourself. Let us to decide what to do, right? But the West is not. The West is very intrusive in a way. That's what the Russians call the liberal totalitarianism. Liberals in a way that want to, preaches around the world, try to globalize everything the West has. This is as good or bad as old imperialism, by the way. So that's something the Chinese understand that.
One thing that is interesting, of course, in this new multipolarity that we are now in is that by just the sheer fact of the matter that you now have more powers. You have Russia, China, the United States, but you also have India, you also have Indonesia, Southeast Asia, that are not as as you said, as independent as, like, let's say China, but they are more independent from certain influences than before, let's say during the Cold War, or
Yeah,
well, so as a matter of fact, now you have the possibility that these different centers will form new understandings with each other. And I think a good example is how India and China are managing their differences, and they have like very strong differences, including like border skirmishes, but that they are managing, still cooperating while recognizing that they have troubles. Do you think that this new way of managing, I mean, unity of difference and so on, will impact the way that the rest, the global South, is cooperating, despite the stuff that the West might do? Because unfortunately, the Western core strategy is a divide and conquer. Do you think, which
yeah.
works directly against unity of differences, right? How do you see this playing out?
I think you push the magic button, divide it and conquer. That used to be the past, divide and conquer. This is Western strategy. It's still the strategy, by the way. Divided the non-Western conquer, and I would add a divide and quit. There's a title. This is a title of a book in the 60s. How the British left the subcontinent, leaving Pakistan and India in a forever war state, divided and quit. Decolonization, this is exactly what the Europeans did for most of the African states, because they colonized the whole continent and carved them out according to their so-called administrative line. And those Western imposed administrative line cut through the linguistic, culture, and the natural tribals. Once they left, you start to see multi-nations in one state. That's the root cause of many, many Western conflicts in the past 30, 40 years, by the way, for better or worse. So this is something that the West has left, after, the mostly end of World War II. But the question you ask is, to what extent the global South now, that is a fashionable term, will be able or has been doing to work together for this so-called unity of the difference. I would say it has been an ongoing process for decades. So let me give you a couple of examples. One is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This is now it has been ever since the year 2001. Before that was Shanghai Five, between China, Russia, and several Central Asian states to managing border issues and also internal stability. But in 2001, just a few months before September 11th, it renamed the Shanghai Cooperation. Now, India, Pakistan, Iran, lots of Saudi Arabia and lots of Middle Eastern countries joined this group. And even Israel tried to apply at one time to join Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but never get into the process, by the way. But Israel is appealing to even. So this is a one that you see how Shanghai Cooperation Organization is organized and operates. It's totally different from NATO, from European Union. It's a collection of a group of diverse civilizations, but almost all the major religions in the world represented in Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You have Russian as the Orthodox slash Christianity. China is a Confucius, a secular. Hindu. You have Muslim. You have all the. This is far away from the clash of civilizations. It has been going on for decades. Open your eyes. I'm sorry to look at this. Of course, it's not ideal. It's not ideal, but they have managed to work together for many internal and external issues, and they try to manage the borders. By the way, the Russians actually use Shanghai Cooperation Organization to mediate China-Indian border dispute. You know that? The Russians actually invited Chinese, and this is the foreign ministers meeting in Moscow. So they have a three-way conference. It happened multiple times. They try to mediate those things rather than taking advantage or dividing and rule. So this is a Shanghai Cooperation Order. And the same thing happened to the BRICS. The BRICS is basically is a non-Western or global South organization, and of course the term was coined by I forgot his name, is as American banker, but it took a life of its own. So BRIC too is organization of diverse political, culture, and civilizational entities, and they work together. Again, there are problems within BRICS. They are not all, China has a huge financial economic power vis-a-vis other small, but they are on the same standing. They develop their financial arms, the BRICS new bank, and the Chinese actually try to push its own proposals. Like President Xi Jinping in the past 2 or 3 years made 3 major proposals. This developmental proposal is a global development prosperity. The Chinese actually cancel all the tariffs of all African countries. Stuff into China is no tariff. Can you believe that? And this is China has done. The second proposal is a global security proposal. It's a equal security and all security for all, not just for a few. You may think this is like a 1919, the Wilsonian, Versailles settlement, the collective security. Yes, the global South pushed for that. And once Ukraine was started, they tried to push for, peace proposals. Eventually, past September, they launched the Friends of Peace in UN. Many, I think initiated by Brazil, China, and joined by Egypt, Turkey, and all many third world countries of the global South. So it's happening right now. But again, I want to say the rise of the global South does not necessarily mean the end of the West. It only ends Western domination of the non-West. So West always has a position. So Western countries need to open their eyes to see that the world, the multipolar world, perhaps the Chinese or global South version is not necessarily that horrible. It's a yes or no, black and white. The world is far diverse. So, in this diverse world, let's work together precisely because we're different. If we are different, you should actually work together. Unlike you, now they're deeply divided. So let me stretch the point a little bit further. I think the Western country always argue democracy is the best system. I agree that's the Western choice. I don't say this is a bad system, and no matter how you achieved it, but but the ultimate criteria to see a maturity of a nation is to see how you treat a different country. Mm. It's far easier to love your own people. Like the Japanese, develop the cozy culture, they love it. They bow to each other so much. That's fine. That's the minimum you should do. It's the minimum the American blacks need to be treated like whites. That's the minimum, not something like the set standard, but the ultimate criterion or the highest level of civilization is to treat someone different from you. Do you agree? It's very easy to work with someone you agree in the workplace, but it's far challenging if you work with someone have a different view. So this is the Chinese. It's a hard way. It's a far more challenging way. This is exactly what Confucius argued. Work with others if, there's a unity of the differences. A unit of similarity is damned easy. So, NATO is all the sameness, European Union all the same. So what? Do you think you can treat the non-European countries like Turkey the same way? By the way, Turkey never able to get into it because its skin color not right, because it's a Muslim, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
the biggest problem of the Europeans is that they thought they are done, that colonialism is over because they don't feel it
no,
anymore. That they think that. And the other thing is they think they got over racism, which they never did. It's just so
they
laughable
never
to
did.
me, but it
Yeah.
is tragic because it still forms the core of their worldview and the view of themselves, which they is to them is so benign, which they make sure that everything else looks threatening. And this is a tragedy. It's a self-made tragedy of ignorance to me, and I
Yeah.
don't know how to deal with that.
Well, I think you know more about Europe than me, and perhaps you from Europe. I respect your opinion, but by the way, I respect Western culture. I think Western democracy, liberalism has its own historical, cultural, or civilization root. But be honest, how you would promote it to other parts of the world? Let others decide what to do. I mean, look at the Western democracy these days. This is so-called the liberal international order now in shambles, in deep, deep crisis, because for whatever the reasons, many of these problems are caused by those forever wars that collective West waged against non-West since the end of the Cold War, right? All those wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, in Syria, in Libya, greater Middle East and Africa, all those wars that collective West waged against non-West, no matter in where, like Iraq, in Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, many parts. Now Trump tried to reclaim the Gulf of America, and Mexico, and Panama Canal, or even, but never mind. These things, exactly those, uh, exporting those things to the non-West part, that really caused so much of the pains in the West. Those not only the rise of extreme forces in many parts of the West, non-West, but also refugees and homeless and millions. Look at the Gaza. I mean, this is the 21st century, Holocaust. There's nothing you can do about it. By the way, I don't want to. I think Israel and Palestine deserve their own homeland, but look at the West. The West failed to solve its own problem. Holocaust started in the West. Now it's outsourced to the non-West. How and why? Of course, I respect the life and the rights of Jewish people. It's wonderful people, but think about the impact of the West, uh, waged wars against non-West. So fundamentally, I disagree with Huntington's notion that the entire history of the world is Western civil war. This is he wrote in Clash of Civilizations. Ever since Treaty of Westphalia, West never fighting, and the West Civil War finally ended in 1991, which is the end of the Cold War. But he called it a Western Civil War. I think it's a damned wrong notion, because of all those so-called Western civil wars, the non-West always impacted. Look at World War I. Third world countries, non-West countries fought on both sides. And World War II, it covers so much of it. China suffered 35 million casualties in the 14 wars waged by the most westernized nation, Asian nation, which is Japan. Japan has westernized so much, it's earned the honorary white title, by the way. I think that's a shame, but it's the most militarized non-Western country. And eventually it's a blowback against the West itself. I mean, Pearl Harbor, right? So I think, look at the West, all the Western civil wars. Now the West try to push those good values, a belief, diversity, everything. Stop doing it. Let the non-West decide what to do. So I think this is something that we would learn. Again, I think this, I don't know how this, you know, uh, respond to your question. I think it's a very broad question that I think the Ukraine war, which is I call it Western Civil War 2.0, because it's a, Trump's, look at the way President Trump deals with the Ukraine war and the Palestinian-Israeli war. I think this is a priority because down to in his heart, I believe he does not want to see the Europeans killing Europeans. I may be wrong, but I think for him, this is a tragedy. For me, it's a tragedy too. I think both Ukraine and the Russian people are wonderful people. And look at how many Ukraine women now drafted into the military. 70,000. 70. Now, where are those men? Gone. And the stronger the Europeans position for more arms, more support to Ukraine, and more Ukrainians will die in this unwinnable war. It's a senseless war. Let me give you one point example. Trump really tried to punish General Mark Milley, the former Joint Chief of Staff. Uh, you know, I respect him because Milley was the only American, famous American, that tried to tell it's time to stop in November 2022. This is about 10 months into the Ukraine war. This was right after the Ukraine forces pushed back the Russians from Kherson area and advancing actually. But General Milley actually said, he was talking to the Economic Club of New York, and he said, it's time to negotiate. Let's remember history. By Christmas time of 1940, both sides of the European warring side realized the war was going nowhere, and 1 million casualties occurred already. They felt that they would go nowhere, but they lacked the courage to push for compromise, the peace. So all countries, all participants chose war. So by the end of World War I, 3 years later, 20 million died. So this is something Milley said. He was the first and only senior official, at the time, talk about it. But he was quickly brushed aside by the Biden administration. Ever since, nobody ever talked about this. And he himself tried to, quote unquote, clarify his position, by the way. So that's the end of this. But it's a tragedy that we still see the young and even old Ukrainians fighting in the front and dying.
Yeah.
Right? And after this, I remember a year ago, in March 2024, Pope Francis talked about it. He talked, I cite, it's okay to negotiate. Negotiation does not mean surrender. He was talking about Ukraine side insistence. They wrote into their constitution, there's no negotiations with Putin. But the Pope talked about it does not mean raising the white flag. It's an honor to talk about, to stop fighting. It's not a shame. But he was quickly, and the Europeans mad with him, or the other Europeans too. Think about that. Milley and the Pope, these are isolated voices. Until now, we have President Donald Trump. And this is why in my article, I said, Donald Trump actually deserves a Nobel Peace Prize if the Europeans allowed him to have it, by the way.
The one of the parts of the tragedy at the moment is that these absolute fundamentals, the most basic of principles, are not just not adhered to, but systematically ignored. I mean, it is just a matter of fact, of pure logic, that you make peace. If you make peace, it implies that you have an enemy, right? And making peace means coming to an agreement among enemies. That's just what that entire endeavor is about, and that is
Yeah.
such a strange notion at the moment to the war faction, because the war faction and the war logic, of course, wants to resolve problems through more war. And they frame that as peace. But of course, that's not peace. That's war logic. The peace logic is to talk to the enemy, period. And that's what's intellectually criminalized at the moment in these quarters of the West. It's not everywhere anymore. And Donald Trump is actually decriminalizing this strain of
Yeah,
thought.
yeah. No matter how he's viewed in by part of American society, I mean the liberals and the Democrats. I think Donald Trump has the common sense. I would say, forget about this garbage of political correctness or theories of democracy. Common sense is more important. Love your people, love other people. Life is life. And I think Trump would have his problem, but I think he made a very difficult step. And I would like, personally, this is not necessarily I represent it, but personally, I observe him so much. I may disagree with many of President Trump's policy, but I think I would like to see his peace effort successful, at least to a certain degree, at least to slow down the killing spree of this war. And speaking of this force of peace ignored by the West, I think you're absolutely right. Uh, Let me make a quick point. Tomorrow, I just heard a few hours ago on the TV, watch TV, that they're going to release the Kennedy papers, John F. Kennedy, tomorrow.
Really?
Tomorrow. Yes.
We're talking on March 18, by the way, 17, 18. Like, so yeah.
Already
By the
18
time this
times.
goes online, it might already be out. But
Yeah. This is President Donald Trump said today. I watch on TV, and he was actually talking about Tulsi Gabbard, his intelligence czar. Tulsi Gabbard actually responds, yes, we are going to release this, something like 20,000 pages of paper. President Kennedy, absolutely one of the reasons he died, got assassinated. This is my guess. He antagonized the military-industrial complex. I hope I'm wrong, but I think this is but at least he made, right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, he realized American foreign policy should not be just selfishly serve Americans' own interests. So he made a speech in the American University of Washington, and he was talking about the peace for everybody, peace, the long-term peace, genuine peace, and the peace not only for the Americans, but for the Soviets, for the Russians. So that kind of thing is totally unacceptable, like what Donald Trump is doing today for the old Europe and for certain parts of North America. I mean, the collective West, those war parties, war factions, those are politically correct. And I think, by the way, I call them chicken hawks, like Europeans, because they want to fight war, but they're really chicken. They don't have arms. They still want others to die for them. I call them, this is what some Americans call those civilians, like Bill Clinton, Hillary, and Dick Cheney, and younger Bush. I mean, President Bush. They never fight a war, but they want to wars, forever wars. So chicken hawks is those people. But I think Europeans deserve the title of chicken hawks. Oh, of course, maybe including Canadians too. But President Kennedy's quote unquote crime is that he started to realize that in the nuclear age, the only way out for the whole world is a peace for everybody. The way he drafted his speech was very interesting. Later, he revealed to his close friends he couldn't, let his presidential speechwriter. He drafted himself on airplane and several drafts and made this. This is still available and I quote him from time to time. I think that's something that Kennedy was totally. By the way, on the campaign trail for his election, he was a hawk. He accused President Eisenhower as betraying, as allowing the Soviets have the so-called missile gap. It turned out the missile gap in reverse, and he accused Eisenhower as allowing U.S. strategic forces to decline so much. But once he was in the White House, he realized the U.S. had too many, and then the Bay of Pigs, disaster, the Cuban Missile Crisis. He realized those deep states, by the way, Donald Trump used, but he realized the deep state, the Pentagon, really want to assert themselves and try to manipulate, the whole crisis. And he secretly talked to the Soviet side, allowed his brother to talk to the Soviet side, bypassing State Department, bypassing CIA. And this may be the ultimate crime. This is my guess, by the way. But I think now Donald Trump is in such a position, and he's viewed by many in the old Europe and also, I would say, in part of America as politically incorrect. The mainstream media still, day in and day out, condemn him and betraying, the Western values, the Western interests. This is the very reason why I published the article. It's not just for the European, but also for the collective West. I think we need to give a peace a moment. And this is a very difficult, unique moment, a window of opportunity that finally someone in the White House realized that all things were wrong. Yes, it's still Russia's war. That's no question, but not unprovoked, not unprovoked, as what I call newspeak in the West for many years, unprovoked. The rule-based international, that's a lot. Russian did fight a war, but it has been provoked times again. So that's what I see.
The thing is that for the longest time, for the last 500 years, the Europeans and the Anglo-Americans, like this collective, was able to impose its view of the world on everybody else. This is going to be the first time when it doesn't work and when they will have to come back to revisit their own framing. And this unprovoked is going to be a huge reframing, and it's going to hurt, but it's going to be necessary in order to understand where all of this went so wrong.
This is actually has been Chinese consistent view that the Ukraine war has its deep historical and political strategic background. It's not just isolated, dropping from the sky. This is the reason why the Russians want to see the source of the war. So on this side, on this issue, the Chinese agree with the Russians. But on the other side, the Chinese may still would like to see that the sovereignty, the territorial rights of the of Ukraine be preserved and the recognition. So it's going to be a very long and difficult process. It's not 24 hours, by the way. This is but many people make fun of President Trump. I would say give President Trump a chance. I mean, this is something like a little kid. Of course, he's 80, not 80, 78 years, 78 years old. And something that I would say he may not have much time. But the peace process is just a brief window of opportunity. And something that I hope that there will be more positive result.
I hope so too. I hope so too. And I would like to thank you, Bin, for all the insights. People who want to read from you, I suppose they should go to Comparative Connections. And where else do you publish your insights usually?
I forgot. There's many places in the internet. Oh, it's okay.
I'll put them into the descriptions, the ones that I can find, and people can find you by Googling your name as well.
I enjoy working with your platform. I think it's becoming far more meaningful now. I think you enterprises to start with at a difficult time, and many people doubted it. Neutrality is a dirty word, and then it's not. Being in the middle is far more difficult than taking sides.
Mhm.
This is confuses being in the middle, by the way. So I think you are in a very heroic and a meaningful process. I respect you by all means.
Thank you for
And I
that.
want to thank you. Thank
I
you very much.
I have one more thing to talk to you about once we switch the camera off, but at this point, I would like to thank you, Yubin, for your time today.
Okay. Thank you.